Welcome to the Champions for Earth vidcast. My name is Laura Baldwin. I'm an Olympic sailor and one of the core crew leading Champions for Earth, which aims to educate, inspire and support past and present sports people to speak and act for climate and nature however they feel motivated to. And today we're really honoured to have Nikki Hawkins here from HEARD, which is an organisation that works with people and the media to inspire content that changes hearts and minds. And we're really grateful for Nikki today, who is HEARD's climate consultant, for offering to run this training session for all our sporting stars out there so that you can feel educated and empowered to use your voice to spark stories that will create the change that we need to see in the world. Nikki, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And it's great to be with you today. And it's great to be reaching your amazing champions. Such an alignment with what you're trying to do and what we hope to be able to help with. So this is all about how to talk about climate change effectively. And what we mean by speaking effectively is speaking in ways that actually kind of change hearts and minds, move things forward, kind of take us out of the impasse that we can often feel that we're in when we're trying to talk about and move things forward on climate. So we are an organisation that works with lots of different people in lots of different ways to get really effective stories and communications out into real life. We draw on lots of research on how to shift public perceptions on big challenging issues. And we support people and people creating content to embed these research insights in their world. And as I said, it is all designed to help you move the conversation forward. So my first kind of piece of insight I'm going to share with you is in the form of a question. And if you don't mind, Laura, I will come to you and ask you, what sort of person do you think rates their interest in environmental issues as 8 to 10 out of 10?
I would say anyone that's taking climate action is definitely within that category.
So what springs to mind for you there is someone who's maybe an activist or is doing something, very active in their life around climate. And that's often the response that we get when we ask people this question. People think it's activists, they think it's people who are members of certain groups. Sometimes people think it's specifically young people, whereas actually the research shows that this is everyone. So this is a high degree, this is about 75% of all people, and it cuts across all different types of people and all different demographics. So caring about and being engaged in environmental issues is extremely normal. It's extremely mainstream. Many more people care than we often tend to think care about climate. In fact, over 80% of people in the UK know that we face a climate emergency and want to see action to change it. And that number is going up. So people know and they care. That's our first big kind of thing to remember. But we can struggle to see big picture solutions to that. We can struggle to see the problem, the issue in all its complexity, and to be able to cut through that to understand what's really going on and what's going to solve it. So whilst we have expert scientists saying fossil fuels, the solution to climate change is fossil fuels must stay in the ground, we must phase out fossil fuel use. Lots of people who are not experts in these issues and are not kind of as engaged as probably many people on listening to this are, do not readily connect climate change with those big picture solutions, with net zero policies, with fossil fuel use, with energy. They might be more inclined to think about maybe recycling or other types of solutions that of course are part of the picture, but aren't that huge shift that we need to make and we need to prioritize. And people are increasingly fatalistic. So lots of research shows how easy it is to become very fatalistic and to assume that we can't fix these problems. And this is particularly an issue for young people. So a survey showed that half of young people think humanity is doomed. really kind of upsetting statistic there. And 75% of young people think the future is frightening. It's not limited to young people. We know 75% of adults are worried about the impact of climate change. So generally, we're seeing a sense of kind of strong sense of awareness, but with that awareness comes the perception that these problems are maybe too big or too far gone to fix. So the good news is that people accept there's a problem when it comes to the climate emergency, but many don't believe it can be fixed. And this is really core to what we are supporting communicators to recognise and to navigate in their communications, because we know that we can act. The IPCC report frames the moment we're in as a crossroads. So this is the time for action. We face a choice. We have the tools and know-how required to limit warming and secure a livable future. I think it can be difficult for those of us who are very active on these issues to feel that sense of agency and not succumb to that sense of kind of deep fatalism, especially when we kind of look at what's happening maybe in politics at the moment. But actually, we need to hold on to the idea that this is something we can act on, and that this is possible, because we know that how we talk about climate change in the moment we're in really matters. So communications always matter. Communications always affect how people hear us and hear what we have to say. But we think that the particular moment we're in on the climate crisis now makes it all the more important for us to be able to land the messages that we intend, and to be heard in the way that we want to be heard. So we know from lots and lots of research and lots of experience, I think we've all probably sort of had experiences that would tell us this, that the words we use have an impact. And so I'm going to share a study that showed just how much of an impact the words that we use can have. So this is not directly, it's climate relevant, but it's not a research into climate change communications. It's actually research that looked at the way that hurricanes in the US are named. So we'll all be familiar with the fact that hurricanes are given human-sounding names. And since the 1970s, there's been a system of alternating male-sounding names with female-sounding names. And some researchers wanted to look at what effect this has. What does this do to how people hear about the threat of a hurricane? And they found, rather alarmingly, that female-named hurricanes were 3 times as deadly as male-named hurricanes. Now, this wasn't anything to do with, coinciding with the ones that they gave a female name having kind of higher speeds or being more dangerous. It wasn't to do with the kind of actual physical features of the hurricanes. It was all to do with the subconscious reaction that people had to female-sounding names. It meant that they didn't take the threat of a hurricane as seriously, and they didn't evacuate or take precautions. So this tells us lots of things, probably lots of depressing, unsurprising things about how we perceive gender, but it also tells us that what we call things really matters, and the terms that we use to describe threats and the need to act on threats can make all the difference. And we don't want to inadvertently be sending out the wrong message. We don't want to be inadvertently sort of saying, run from Hurricane Jane, and people are somehow hearing, actually, it's not that bad. So our work is all about helping you to choose the words that are going to have the most impact and going to allow you to be heard in the way that you intend to be heard. So I'm going to go through 6 principles that should hopefully help you to do that. And the first one is to make it doable, to show it's doable. We talked a little bit about the high levels of fatalism that people feel when it comes to climate and nature. And it's not about kind of pretending there's no problem. It is about balancing the urgency and the high stakes with the sense that we can fix it. So I want to distinguish kind of can-do framing from other types of framing that we hear quite frequently. So we often hear people saying we need to be more positive. And we would say maybe positive isn't the right way of thinking about this, because positivity feels, to me, feels quite passive. So it feels like we're saying everything is fine, and that's obviously not true. It's disingenuous. It sends out the wrong message, false reassurance. hopeful, I think, lands us in a similar space. It's not about being hopeful passively and just hoping for the best, saying everything will be fine. But it's also not about kind of pure crisis framing and saying everything is ruined, everything is bad, everything is wrong, this is not possible. It's about balancing that urgency with that agency and saying we can change this, we can improve this, this is within our reach, this is doable. So to show what that can look like when we apply it to a kind of piece of text that is talking about the threat that climate change poses, instead of saying, climate change is the biggest challenge we face, life on Earth is in crisis, we've missed tipping point after tipping point, and the planet is slowly dying, which is often what we feel compelled to say. It's the type of thing we think we need to say to really wake people up to the challenge that we face. We can say something like, we face major threats to the future of our planet and human life on it, but we have it within our power to repair and restore our world. We can and must act now. So this is not playing down the fact that we face major threats, that the stakes are high and the time is running out, but it is giving that kind of equivalent dose of agency and of language that speaks to the fact that we can act now. So to show this kind of in real life, this is Cate Blanchett kind of bringing this principle to life, saying there's no greater challenge facing us as a species than climate change, but we human beings are capable of so very much. And of course, there are solutions, they're already out there. We just need to harness them. So again, it's really about that balance and be thinking that every time we introduce that sense of kind of agency, of urgency, of telling people how important and urgent this is, we include equivalent ounce of agency of making this doable, of that kind of can-do language. And related to this is our second principle, which is about what we normalize. So we need to normalize action and not inaction. I'm going to walk through what that means and why it matters. So as humans, what we think is normal matters. It matters a lot. We are guided by what we think other people think. In fact, some psychologists say that what we think, feel, and do is influenced, often to a startling degree, by what we believe everyone else is thinking, feeling, and doing. During COVID and during the lockdowns, some research showed that it wasn't that we didn't kind of lock down, we didn't kind of follow the rules because we were necessarily sort of scared of contracting the virus, although it's probably true for some people. For most of us, we did it because we thought other people were doing it. We thought it was the right thing to do, the morally, socially conscious thing to do. And we did it because a norm was set that this was what everyone else were doing. So we need to normalize the path through the climate crisis. And at the moment, our sense of what's normal when it comes to climate is a little bit off. We haven't quite, we're not a good judge of what other people think and feel and are doing in relation to climate change. So this is slightly convoluted, but a little bit of research looked into what people think other people think when it comes to climate change. So they asked the question, to people themselves, do you think that you are yourself not worried enough about climate change to change your lifestyle or urge governments to act? And only 16% of people think that they themselves aren't sufficiently worried. If you ask the question about what people think other people are thinking and doing, you get 73% of people saying that's true. So basically, people think that other people's opinions, attitudes, and lifestyles are the problem, and that those things aren't changing. And that is because we have normalized the idea that people don't care and aren't acting. And we see that, when I shared with you the initial slides, when we talk about 80% of the public really care and really want to see action, it's taken it that change in public attitudes in the last few years. It's taking us a while to realize just how normal and how mainstream caring and wanting action is. And it's very easy to inadvertently normalize inaction. So Ellie Goulding is a fantastic advocate for climate action. But often when she talks about it, she talks about the backlash that she gets. She talks about jeopardizing her job and losing followers when she talks about climate change. And you can see why she's doing this. So she's doing this because she's saying this matters so much that I am speaking out in spite of that backlash. But actually, when people hear this, what they're hearing is actually most people don't care. They don't want Ellie Goulding to talk about climate change. They wish she would shut up. And we know that's not true. We know that, you know, there might be a small minority, a vocal minority of people who, for whom, you know, they will respond negatively to people talking about climate change. But for the vast majority of us, we want to hear more about climate change from people we look up to and admire. Prince William does the opposite. So when he talks about climate change, he says things like this: more and more businesses and politicians are answering the call. And perhaps most inspiringly, this cause is now being spearheaded by an amazing and united generation of young people around the world. Never before have we had so much power to change the big things. So what he's doing here is he's focusing on the level of action and the level of concern and the level of energy that is going into you know, fighting the climate crisis, instead of focusing his attention on that kind of small vocal minority who are maybe trying to delay things. And we've seen some really good stuff around this in the sports space as well. So one of the things that the research shows about social norms is that it can be really powerful to talk about the process of change. So instead of talking about the outcome of change, so somebody saying, I have changed and I am now, you know, perfect, I am doing this all right, instead to say, I'm on a journey, I'm learning about this, and I want things to change here. So really good example, Patrick Bamford saying, to be honest, until 3 or 4 years ago, I'd heard about the climate crisis but ignored it. It's actually when my best mate got me involved, and actually talking about that process of like learning more, wanting to do something about it is really, really powerful, because we're all on a journey. And if we normalize the process of change, we can help people feel less judged and less likely to want to disengage. Okay, our third principle is all about using health language. So this is great for people who are working in the sporting space, who are trying to kind of connect our own health through sports with the health of our planet. It's a very natural way. And the research shows that when we talk about the planet's health and we talk about our own health, it does a few different things. One of the things it brings it home for people. It kind of makes it intuitively make sense, and it makes it matter, you know, talking about that. It also helps people feel more of a sense of agency, because whilst people can understand that harm can happen and that we can inflict harm on our world, we can also heal. So there's an inbuilt sense of the potential for positive change. So as an example, again, instead of that very kind of fatalistic negative language, everything's getting worse, you know, and then adding in, we need to act now at the end, we can talk about how our health depends on us having a healthy planet. Our actions can hurt the planet, but they can also heal our world while protecting our own health. So this can feel a bit kind of heavy-handed, but the research would suggest, you know, go for it with the health language, you know, talk about the health of the planet, talk about how it connects with our health. It really helps us to feel more connected and to recognize the interconnection between, you know, it's not us over here as people and the planet over there. Actually, we're deeply dependent on each other. So a couple of examples of these. First one is Barack Obama using this principle to talk about the health of the oceans.
The fate of the world's oceans affects every single one of us. They are our life support system. Our health and theirs are bound together.
So this language of kind of our health and their health is bound together, life support system, really, really effective at allowing people to kind of, to bring it home to people and show why it matters and show that it can be fixed as well. And again, we see this come through in the language that Prince William uses around his Earthshot Prize, using language like repair, revive. These are really good words that help people to feel not just positive, but can do, that this is something that is possible. And another example from a different space is this is something that the scriptwriters of Holby City incorporated into a storyline they were working on around the climate crisis.
Our planet has a terminal disease. We're to blame. There is hope. There is treatment. And if we start now, we can help it to recover. You, of all people, know about making things better.
So you see this kind of drawing on the parallels between human health and human recovery and the planet's health and the planet's recovery. And, you know, we know that is a really good way to help people engage with these issues. Okay, fourth of our 6 principles is about evoking responsibility to young people and future generations. So as we've talked about, in the last few years, we have seen a huge increase in the number of people who are concerned and engaged in the climate crisis. It's gone from being a much more niche issue to being a mainstream issue. And when I first started working in climate communications, this was very much the way that the issue was being communicated. So it was a scientific problem. It was a complicated problem. It was brought to life by Al Gore and these graphs that I think most of us don't really understand exactly what it's saying, apart from that the line goes up and that's bad. But it really was framed as an over there problem. And I think part of the reason we've seen this huge uptick in people being concerned is that the issue has been reframed about being a people story. This is about all of us as people. And one of the best ways we can keep that going, and we can keep saying to people, this matters because it's about all of us as people, is by talking about young people, by centering young people themselves, and showing why this matters in terms of responsibility to young people and to future generations. So again, as an example of that, moving away from that kind of very straightforward, direct science language, the science is clear, talking about the number of degrees, which for people who are not engaged in this can be a bit confusing. You don't really understand what that means. Maybe 2 degrees doesn't actually sound that bad if you're, living in the UK. Moving away from that kind of language and instead talking about how we all want to pass on a healthy planet to young people, to our children and grandchildren. We can and must act now to protect and repair our future, so our planet, so it's fit for the future. So this has proved really effective in I would say in real life. But there's also lots of research looking at this. So a piece of research looked at kind of the Greta effect, showing that even for kind of audiences who were less engaged in climate, so even for people in the US who are maybe further away from kind of climate activism themselves, familiarity with someone like Greta really did kind of increase their level of awareness and motivation and what they call collective efficacy, this idea that together we can do something. And it's not just about Greta, it's about, young people being centered and supported to speak out more generally. So example there of Lazine from Kenya talking about his love of the outdoors and football after hearing about deforestation, climate change and plastic pollution. So being able to kind of connect those issues in ways that make sense for your audiences and for your context. So the 5th of our principles is about widening the lens so that we talk about this issue of people maybe understanding that we face a crisis, but not necessarily being attuned to the most important and fundamental solutions, i.e. the need to phase out fossil fuel use. So we need to widen the lens for people to talk about that big picture and those big picture solutions, because we know that if we focus only on the small stuff, it can obscure the bigger picture. So as an example, this is a bit grainy. This is taken from a tube ad, but this is IKEA saying do very little for climate change and talking about how you can, swapping old light bulbs and changing old muffin trays into veggie gardens, and then kind of making those small actions central to the fight against climate change. And on the one hand, you might say, well, actually, what's wrong with that? We can all do our bit, and it's really good to have people talking about how we can play our part. On the other hand, some research shows that if we only talk about small scale change, it prevents us from thinking about the big picture changes that we need to make. So that kind of very granular, very kind of carbon footprinty individual kind of language and solutions can actively obscure and make us less inclined to support the big picture policy shifts that we need to see. And good news on this, people actually want to hear stories about businesses taking responsibility. So people place a high degree of responsibility on sustainability for large companies as much as for the national government. So they really want to hear about big companies, big institutions doing their bit, waking up to their responsibility and starting to act. And we can connect what individuals are doing to that bigger picture. So it's a lovely quote from Ella Powell saying, at the start of the season, I invested in an electric car. I wouldn't have been encouraged to do that if there wasn't the infrastructure in place in the club. So I really like this example of like kind of, it's put somebody taking their responsibility, doing something and doing something that's going to have a big impact, but connecting it to the system and the infrastructure that enables and supports that. And we need to hear much, much more of that to move away from the idea that this is kind of individuals acting individually in isolation, maybe making different consumer choices. No, this is all about us all being engaged as citizens. Okay, so my sixth and final and hopefully very straightforward principle is all about keeping it down to earth. So climate and sustainability comes with a kind of rich and bewildering set of jargon. And it's very easy once you're kind of working in this space and acting in this space to speak in terms that don't necessarily mean much for people who have had less exposure to that kind of language. So some research a couple of years ago showed that terms like net zero, green jobs, even the COP conferences, these are not well understood by, you know, up to half of the population. So we need to kind of use the language that is going to be instinctively and immediately kind of resonant and clear for as many people as possible, especially when we're talking about kind of sport and the sports world, because it's all about appealing to everyone and making this open and engaging for everyone rather than kind of keeping this within more narrow circles. Okay, so that is it for my principles. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and see if you have any questions.
Oh, Nikki, thank you so much for that brilliantly informative talk. I've written pages of notes. I know you said we would have the slides, but still it just sparked so much within me to reframe the way that I'm communicating this message, balancing that mix of the urgency and the sense of we can fix this. And I just see sport as such a powerful platform for communicating this and for showcasing the changes we need to make in like really exciting, appealing and rewarding ways. And as nobody else is really showing great leadership in this moment, we look at government and it's just lacking. I just think sport has such an opportunity to step in and to really, spark the stories that are going to change the world for the better. So that is absolutely brilliant. Thank you. And we'll share this with all our wide audience. I don't know, Etienne Stott, Olympic gold medalist, is also on the call. Have you got any questions that came to mind straight away? I do have some sort of specific-y type questions, but I get dragged down the rabbit hole of wanting to know some of the key scientific facts so that I can feel strong in standing up and saying, well, you know, actually, this is what the reality of the situation is. This is the time frame that we've got. This is why it's really imperative that you do bigger steps now, not these incremental parts. But Etty, what did you make of that?
Yeah, I think it was fantastic. Thank you, Nikki. And thank you to her. There's obviously a lot of research and gathering lots of different sources of information. I think it accords very well with a lot of the other communicators that we've had coming in to speak to the Champions for Earth community. I think, yes, this focus on, you know, agency, this is the kind of energy that sports brings, you know, and rising to the challenge. It is this focus, as you suggested, about connecting our sense of responsibility, making sure about the systemic picture here. I think it's super great. So I just want to say, you know, on behalf of the Champions for Earth, thank you very much for doing that. And I guess what we will do is we'll share as much information as we can about you, and we may even book a session, or we don't quite know exactly what yet, but yes, hopefully people know that they can get in touch with you and also take this into the communities that they're connected with as well.
Absolutely. And I 100% agree that there is such a strong alignment with the sort of values and the vibe of sport and what we're recommending. And there's such a really nice alignment, very natural, very instinctive way of connecting what kind of, you know, brings people to sport and the energy that we need to unleash when it comes to kind of talking about and tackling climate change. So yeah, I feel fired up.
Thank you so much, Nikki. And yeah, we'll get this out there, and much appreciated.